How many of you have know who Harry Potter is? How many of you have read Harry Potter's books? How many of you don't care one way or another who Harry Potter was? Our grandkids came along just in time for the Harry Potter mania, and it was something if you didn't experience that. But the point here is to enjoy Harry Potter. In fact, enjoy just about any movie or play or work of fiction or anything like that. You need to use something that the theater people call suspended disbelief. While you're reading Harry Potter, you need to park your is that the right mind? Your right brain is your analytical mind, John? Yours? Oh, John. John. The people named John around here know everything. Which side is your analytical mind? Your right one? The left. Okay. You park your analytical mind to one side. This mind that tells you there is no such thing as wizards and magic and all that stuff. You have to allow yourself to believe the unbelievable just while you are reading the book or watching the TV show or whatever. Children do that naturally. Adults often forget and sometimes have to relearn it. You have to be prepared to believe that Harry Potter went to a train station and found platform 9 3/4, where he got on a train to a magic school called Hogwarts. Now, platform 9 3/4 is a liminal space, a thin space. It's not platform 9 and it's not platform 10. It exists in the imagination, in magic, in mystery. Liminal space, liminal time, is when suspended disbelief allows you to experience a reality beyond what is normally real, to have an experience that is so much more than reality. Now, please don't get me wrong here. I'm talking this morning about spiritual experiences which go beyond our normal experiences. But I'm not for a moment suggesting that logical thinking should not be applied to religious questions. It's important to use our clearest, most careful thinking and apply it to all our endeavors, including spiritual experiences. But clear, rational thinking is not enough. It's sterile. Clear, rational thinking will get you nowhere just on its own. You need something more. Not different than, but in addition to. I've often used the analogy of the sailboat. To make a sailboat work, you need both a rudder and a sail. With the rudder to steer by, if you don't have a rudder, then you're the victim of every little wind that comes up and you're liable to wind up on the rocks somewhere. But without a sail, you sit there bobbing around in the water going absolutely nowhere. We need the rationality of the rudder and the spiritual power of the sail for the complete life. Now this morning I'm talking about the sail that provides power and movement and beauty and love. But please, you keep your hands on the rudder while I'm doing it, okay? We heard 2 Bible readings this morning. One of them comes from the deep riches of the ancient Hebrew legends, the story of Moses and the children of Israel in the desert where they wandered for 40 years while God got them ready for the life in the promised land. You do know why they wandered for 40 years, don't you? Because even then the guys wouldn't ask for directions. According to that story, the dazzling light of God shone on that mountain as Moses went up to receive what we now know as the 10 Commandments. In the second reading, we hear of a cloud of light shining around Jesus on the mountain. In telling this story to each other, the people of the early church were clearly connecting Jesus with Moses, who was regarded as the greatest of all the prophets of the Jewish people. I spent a week in that Sinai desert where all this presumably happened to Moses. It is the driest, most desolate bit of God-forsaken real estate on the planet. Is Margaret here, Marg King? because you couldn't sell this for a nickel. Anyway, but it was in that desert that I was able to suspend my chronic disbelief and to experience. Now, note that I use the word experience, not analyze or come to the conclusion of or think through. Experience what that story was about. It came through a man who was, he was about 7 feet tall, I think, huge, with a big black beard, a Russian Orthodox monk with a full black cassock and a black hat. And he was formidable, let me tell you. And he spoke in a perfect, cultured Oxford English. Please remove your shoes, he said very politely. Vladimir was his name. Vladimir was a monk at St. Catherine's Monastery. It's at the foot of what they call Mount Moses or Mount Sinai. And that is the mountain where, according to tradition, Moses had his encounter with God. Vladimir said this very nicely. It is on this mountain that Moses received the 10 Commandments. I'm thinking, come on, Vlad, baby. Did Moses really go up that mountain? Was there even such a person as Moses? A lot of scholars say he's a legendary figure to whom, in the course of time, many other legends from various tribes and nations, they were sort of ascribed to him. And so I stood there trying not to look too cynical. But just a minute. Take a look at that path leading up that mountain. Those stones are worn smooth by thousands upon thousands of pilgrims who have come here from every corner of the globe to remember God's great gift of the law, God's great gift of presence, God's promise to be among us. So does it really matter if this is the right mountain? Does it matter if the story of Moses is factual history or ancient legend? Isn't the remembering the only important thing? Deep down inside that monastery, we took off our shoes and moved silently into a small, sparse, unadorned room. This is the place, whispered Vladimir. This is the place where God told Moses to take off his shoes because it is holy ground. This is where it all started, right here, in this place. This is where our faith began when Moses met God in the burning bush, where God told Moses to go down to Egypt and tell the Pharaoh, "Let my people go." So let us be silent for a while and remember. Well, I had a choice. I was in the Sinai desert doing a course in biblical archaeology, and in the process I had done a fair bit of study of the Moses legend. And it is the business of archaeology to be skeptical, to question all those legends. And my skeptical intellect was just working overtime. But then that concept came to me from my work in theater, suspended disbelief. If I could suspend my disbelief, park my skepticism for just a while, I might enter into that moment. I could experience the Spirit or analyze the legend, but not both at the same time. The cool sand on the floor soothed my tired feet as I sat down on a rock and I made my choice. And in the silence, in that moment, came an instant, just an instant of absolute certainty. God reaches out to frightened shepherds like Moses and frightened writers like Ralph and gives the gift of holiness and insight and courage, a sense of being called as Moses was called. Go down, Moses, go down, Ralph. Tell those pharaohs of consumerism and loneliness back in Canada, let my people go. A week later, we were back in Israel, same course, in an area known as the Galilee, the place where Jesus spent most of his life and ministry. Not too far from the lake, which they call the Sea of Galilee, is Mount Tabor. Now, by BC standards, it's a moderately high hill. You can take a bus to the top and you'll find a Catholic church up there, not much else. Tradition has it that Mount Tabor is the place where Jesus and 3 of his friends experienced something they didn't understand then, and we still don't understand it now. Because if you squeeze the spiritual juice out of that story, or out of the story of Moses, you need understanding, yes, but you need something more. Now, a little digression here to talk about human memory. Human memory is a strange and wondrous gift. Your memory is not a digital video that faithfully replays your lives back for you whenever you remember the past. Memories, especially memories of poignant events in your lives, change over time. Now, that's not just a silly idea out of my own head, but it's based on solid research into how memory works. Scientists who study this sort of thing are pretty well agreed on this. You don't actually remember the past. We remember the last time we remembered an incident. And the time and the place and with whom we do the remembering colors the memory, so that each time we remember something, it changes, it moves. Details are forgotten, new details are added. Often the story, the memory, is enriched in the process, or sometimes it simply dies. But the stories that humans tend to remember and enrich are the stories with deep meaning and power, like most of the Bible stories. Jesus, Peter, John, and James climbed up a mountain. And while they were there, something happened that scared the daylights out of them. For a long time, they couldn't talk about it. There was an encounter of some kind, an encounter that seemed to underline the connection between Jesus and the ancient prophets Moses and Elijah. It was a liminal experience, inspiring and frightening and weird and wonderful. And when those 3 disciples finally blurted out that story years after Jesus had died, their story was told and retold by the early church, and all who heard it shook their heads in amazement and tried to imagine what that must have been like. So that when it was written down, it was enriched and given power by the faith of all the storytellers who passed it on from one person to another. By the time we reread that story 2,000 years later, we simply have to suspend our disbelief, allow our spirits to marinate in that liminal moment. If we can't do that, then we might as well write the whole thing off as a bit of pious fiction. Liminal moments, moments when we sense a reality beyond and greater than the day-to-day reality we live in, these moments don't only happen to a few, they are actually very common. William James, in a classic book on human nature, claimed that such moments happen to almost everyone, but most people are too shy or too embarrassed to talk about them. I spent a number of years as editor of a preaching magazine which had me traveling all over North America, meeting with groups of clergy from a broad spectrum of denominations. And it was one of those meetings, actually, just by the way, that I first met Donald Schmidt. Now, these clergy often told stories of people, the stories that people had told them, and when they had shared such moments with them. But these people often had told nobody else. Moments near the death of a loved one, at the time of a life-threatening illness, at the birth of a child, during a walk in the woods, in the singing of a hymn or the saying of a prayer, those liminal moments happen. They happen in study groups like the one Bev and I go to every Monday afternoon. They happened this morning at the 8:30 service. There were some powerful stories shared then. One person shares a spiritual experience, and that seems to loosen up the others around the room. Those moments are not rare. We just don't talk about them a whole lot. They do happen. Many of you, maybe even most of you, have had such experiences, even though you may never have ever told anyone about them. Too often when we sense such a moment, we push it aside. We just don't let those moments sink into our souls. We don't stop to wonder what they mean, and we lose the blessings that they could give us. Maybe in school or sometime you've heard a poem, a wonderful little poem by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Earth is crammed with heaven, and every bush is aflame with God. But only those who see take off their shoes. The rest stand around and pick blackberries. One of the reasons we don't talk about those life-enriching, liminal, spiritual experiences is because often there are no words for them. I'm going to tell you two very brief little incidents to illustrate the fact that there are so often just not the right words. It's springtime in the Rockies. Snow outlines the crags and the peaks. A bright spring sunshine highlights every detail. It's beautiful. It's just beautiful. And it is. Of course it is. But my words say so little of sun on mountain peaks. There are no words big enough to capture the glory of that beauty, not even a photograph. I sit beside my sister Peggy and hold her hand while she cries for her son who has just been arrested for armed robbery. When the tears have finished, I see a pain in her eyes that reflects the terror in her soul. Excuse me. I ask her, Peggy, do you want to talk about it? There's a long silence. Several times she breathes as if she's going to say something, and then she says, "Oh, Ralph, there are no words for this. For the best and the worst, there are no words. No words can offer more than pale approximations of glory and despair. But sometimes in the glory and despair of such liminal moments, if we allow ourselves, if, like those ancient Hebrews in the desert or those confused disciples with Jesus on the mountain, if we allow ourselves, we catch a glimpse of God who laughs and cries with us, of God who can never be captured in our words, no matter how big or profound or learned, a God whose presence we can know in our hearts, but never describe with our lips. All the words we use for God, Father, Mother, Yahweh, Elohim, Creator, there are literally hundreds of names people have used to describe God. All those godly names are true, just as beautiful is true of mountains and despair is true of mothers crying for their children. Those words are true as amazing and wonderful were true of Moses' shining face. Those words are true as miracle and transfigured are words for whatever happened on that Galilean hilltop. But all those words are also false. They squeeze the truth to fit our puny minds. Our souls ache for truth that's only known by reaching out beyond the edges of our earthbound, rational, logical minds, beyond the crude approximations of our words. Our souls ache for truth that can be tasted, experienced when we take off our shoes and allow our imaginations to walk on holy ground. There are no words for mountains, for mother's agony, for holiness. There are no words for God. But there is truth. There is beauty. There is power. There is love. All God's gifts are there for those who risk and reach.